Hi, this is Shrikant Adiga, and Neha will be doing part of the presentation. So I'll be doing the initial introduction, and she will do the live demo. We are recording the meeting so that way we can share it on YouTube and use it later for training purposes. So we'll be going through details of what is a workflow, why is a workflow needed, etc., and also different features, and end with the live demo of the workflow and different examples of workflows. So to start with introduction, so before say 10.3, or 10.x, etc., we didn't have this module, so there was a fixed set of things that you could do, and for everything else, for example, if you have to collect specimens, and then you have to collect, say, the frozen event details, and you have to do it across multiple patients or multiple visits. You have to do that individually for each specimen, and then you have to distribute. You would have to go to the distribution module. So there were different things had to be done differently, and you could not do that in batch. And that's what kind of the workflow module allows you to do. You can create customized specimen processing workflows. Basically, it helps you to capture the end-to-end work in the journey of a specimen. And it's a wizard-like thing. It's step by step. So, for example, you see here that this is a plasma processing workflow. So, you start with receive specimens, then you spin, then you create derivatives, then you create aliquots, then you store. So, this is what the person who is in charge of processing plasmas is supposed to do. And this workflow kind of guides them to that process, with each step telling them what kind of fields that they are allowed to do data entry, and each step has its own set of fields. So you can, they just need to. So now if you look at it from their point of view, they can forget rest of OpenSpecimen, come here, scan the specimens that they want to receive, and finish this workflow, and then they're done. So they don't need to bother about anything else. So this is an example of a sodium heparin processing workflow. Now you see that there are a lot more steps. And this is not only specimen type specific, this can be within a collection protocol. Like one collection protocol can have a plasma processing workflow, which has different set of tasks, versus another protocol or another biobank who is using the same OpenSpecimen can have their own plasma processing workflows with their own set of tasks and things like that. This is an example of a tissue processing workflow. So when Neha does the demo, she will actually showing these workflows in action. So right now I'm just giving you an introduction. So and this is a WBC processing workflow, where on the left hand side again you see a lot of different sets of things. So this is what the workflow allows you to do: a guided step-by-step process of tasks that an user has to do. So now what does this result in? This is a genetics workflow. So these are just some sample workflows that we had created for different people. So now what are the benefits of the workflow module? Why use the workflow module? One is for people who are like the original, who have been using OpenSpecimen since long time. For them, it will bring in a huge improvement in terms of productivity. For example, we say it's 50%, but it should be more than 50%, because again, since you're now able to do bulk things in bulk, for example, a lab receives specimens, they're going to receive specimens across, multiple patients. So in today's in the 10.3 OpenSpecimen, you would go into each patient and have to repeat that process for every visit. So every patient you'll have to do that separately. But with workflows, you will be able to do that across patients in one go. So the amount of time you save could be a lot more than 50%. And to give an some maths to this, so suppose if you have 8 users, and on an average they spend, say, throughout the day doing different kinds of data entry, they end up spending 2 hours a day in doing the data entry. With just with even 50% improvement, you're going to save around 8 hours a day worth of effort, which is one person per month effort. So that is the kind of saving that the workflow module can bring in. Lesser number of clicks and page loads, so therefore things will be much faster. You can process multiple specimens in one batch, and also since there are fixed set of things to do, it will reduce the data entry. So because right now what happens is that once you collect the specimen, you might have to go back and do some other thing on the specimen. Whereas with the guided tour kind of thing, there is less chance of someone missing something, and also committing errors. And also you can, in terms of errors, when you're creating the workflow, you can define validation rules on individual fields or on the whole step. For example, one of the steps you can say that this step cannot be skipped. So there is, or if you're going to skip it, you have to enter a reason for the deviation. So you can record deviations and things like that. And tomorrow, filter specimens based on show me all specimens on which there has been a deviation that is recorded. So you can do things like that. So in general, the quality of data would be much higher. And since the user is now limited to doing fixed set of things, the amount of training that you would be doing, asking people to go there, do this, next do this, and don't forget to do that kind of thing, all would get eliminated, because all they need to do is follow the step-by-step process. And it's also, of course, if you're a small biobank with less number of specimens, probably doesn't make sense. But then the more the specimens you're processing, more things, the more benefits or the more savings the workflow module will bring in. Just an overview of what is an workflow, like I just showed in the screenshots. Workflow can have many tasks, and then a workflow can be linked to a specimen or a specimen type or a protocol or a combination of that. It can be also more than that. So it need not be just be specimen type. It can be basically you can choose what kind of filters you want to apply on the specimen. For example, one of the common filter that we apply is if the specimen's received state is to be received, then it goes into the receive workflow. So if the specimen has been collected but not yet received, push it into the workflow for receiving the workflow, things like that. So it's not just based on specimen type. You can use any field in the specimen to limit the specimens to the workflow. We also now support adding, even though we call it specimen workflows, your starting point can be even starting with registering participants, registering multiple participants at a time, and then collecting the visits for them and collecting the specimens. Or it could just be, participants are already registered, but now we want to create visits for them and then collect specimens. So, the starting point can be anything now. To start the workflow is basically, you start with, typically, since most of them are specimen processing workflows, you typically start with the specimen barcode. But at the same time, it could also be, like I just said, a participant's PPID or a visit label, especially for sites which has kits. The visit name is the kit barcode. So now you can just scan the kits. When you receive the kits from the site, all you need to do is scan the kits. It will pull all the specimens within the kits, and then you can start the workflow for the whole kit. Like you're receiving the kit, you need to mark as all the specimens in the kit has been received. So you just scan the kit barcode and then continue with the rest of the barcode. But typically, more or less, 80-90% of the workflows that we develop are specimen-based workflows. So that's why most of the our language or the PPTs and the wiki pages talk about specimen being the starting point. Same thing about access controls. Workflows can be assigned to CPs or users. That way, you only see your workflows. I think there is a bug recently, but in general, the idea is that only the people who see, people should see only their workflows assigned to their CPs and things like that. There's a concept of a waiting queue. So every workflow has a waiting queue. So what a waiting queue means is that when you collect specimens, it can automatically go and sit in a workflow's waiting queue so that people can see. The idea was that when a person who is in charge of processing plasma, when they come in the morning and log in, they can kind of see how many specimens are waiting for me, like what is my today's work. So how many specimens are waiting for me, and take that as the starting point and process the specimen. So similarly, if there is a workflow for tissue specimens, and then you collected some tissues yesterday, so all of them would go and sit in the waiting queue. So so every workflow has a waiting queue, and you can define rules as to how the specimens, what kind of specimens go into which waiting queue. Like I just said, if it is to be received and if it is whole blood, go to the blood processing waiting queue. If it is to be received and if it is tissue, go to the, put these specimens in the tissue specimen waiting queue. So things like that. Uh, so so that can be automatically added to workflows. So in fact, even the the output of the workflow, suppose you started with whole blood and you created plasmas, and the plasma has to now go to a QA or a QC process, and there is a different person who is in charge of doing QC, and there is a workflow for doing the plasma QC. Now, at the end of this workflow, you can say that put all the plasmas in the plasma QC workflow, so that they can start their, so they can see which plasmas are waiting for QC and start their work. So it is not just, so the anytime a specimen can be pushed into, waiting queue of another workflow. Okay, I talked about validations and deviations, which is basically, you can define things like, the number has to be within certain range, dates have to be within certain range, those kinds of things. Or you can define validation on the whole task. You can say that this task as a whole cannot be skipped. So therefore, if they have to skip, they'll have to define why they skipped it, things like that. So you can define very specific validation rules on the on each field. Okay, so that's basically the background of the workflow module. I'll let Neha explain or give a live demo of the workflows.
I'll give you, so whatever workflows we just showed you in the PPT, I'll give you a live demo of those. To start with, we'll look at the register patient workflow. In this workflow, we'll cover two features. One is I'll show you how the registration of patients works, and other is a cart feature. That is, whatever samples you have collected from the workflow are to be pushed to a cart. Okay, so I'll show you the cart first, that it is empty. Okay, so this is the cart that we'll work with, which is now empty. Let's start with the workflow. Okay, so all you need to do is click on create batch. It will take you to the first task. So on the left hand side, all you see is the task. So none of them have been started as of now. So once we start, there'll be a utilization bar shown over here, which will give you an overview of how many tasks have been finished versus how many are yet to be completed. Okay, so we have a feature to look up for patients. So let's say if the patients are being pushed from an external source and you want to know whether the patient that you are registering is new or does it exist in the system. So we can do a lookup for those patients. For now, I have EMPI copied and I want to search whether this patient is already there in the system or not. When I say lookup, it will give me the details of the patient. So there is a participant that exists and I can use this for the registration. If not, I can register a fresh one. Okay. So for now, I'll just use this. Okay. So it will get me all the details of that particular patient. Okay. So this is the patient that we are currently working on. Okay. And I'll click on submit. Okay. So this is now registered a patient. Uh, the registration task has been completed. If you see here, the utilization bar has now come up. So that's one task has been completed, two are yet to go. Here I can select what event I want to register the visit for. So there are two events. I'll say follow up. Other fields are also available. you can add details for those. I'll just add a visit name. Okay. Once done, I'll click on submit. Okay. So these are all the specimens that are there in that particular visit. Okay. And if I want, I can make some changes over here about the quantity. And I accidentally went back. Yeah. So this is the batch. Let me just re-enter this and hit submit. Okay. So now my batch is completed. There will be a new visit added for this patient. Okay, which is the follow-up visit. So that's with today's date. And if I go here to the cart and refresh, I'll find all the specimens that I have collected in the cart. Okay, the primary specimens. So that's one workflow wherein we looked at registration, how the lookup works, and how the specimens are pushed into a cart.
So just to clarify, the ability to add to cart is just a feature of the workflow. So we are just showing that you can do that. Does not mean that every workflow, all specimens get added to some cart. So, we had some use cases where people wanted to process specimens and at the end keep adding specimens to a cart so that at the end of the week or at the end of 2 weeks they can go and distribute those specimens or do something with those specimens. So this is just a demo that within a workflow you can also automatically add specimens to the cart. As I was saying, this eliminates a lot of manual things that you would be otherwise doing. Like you see here that the specimens get automatically added to a cart, so you don't have to do it manually.
Okay. Moving on to the next workflow, that is the plasma processing workflow. As we discussed before, whenever you collect samples, you can set certain rules that, okay, if the samples satisfy these certain criteria, you push it to the waiting queue. Okay. So I'll show you the waiting queue now. It is currently, there are no records over here. Okay. All I need to do is, so from workflows, in the workflows module, I click on the waiting queue. It will take me to this page. Okay. Now for this patient, let's say go ahead and collect the follow-up visit. Okay, this has taken me to the default workflow. Okay, and the navigation is just, I need to check the details and submit. Okay, over here I'll say that I have not yet received the samples. I'm just collecting and they'll be received by someone else. Okay, so I've kept the received quality as to be received, and now I will click on submit. Okay, let me take you to the waiting queue. That will be refreshed once. Okay, so we collected 5 samples and they are now automatically pushed to the queue. Okay, from here now I can start a batch. So if you see here, the workflow name has come up as a plasma processing workflow. Okay, so what I can do is I can either select all the samples, start the batch right away, or if I am planning to process few samples, I can also choose the samples from this list page. Okay, there are also filters available on the right side, using which you can filter out the samples and select the ones that you need. Okay, so for now, I'll just select the samples and click start. So this will now start a batch for the samples that I have selected. Okay, if there are any details to be updated, I can update those. So currently, this is the received event that I am adding data for. If there are any changes, I can do and I can move forward. Okay, so I'll just click on submit. Here a sequence of tasks has been arranged, that the whole blood is first received, then it is spun. So that is a centrifugation event is being added. You can pre-decide on the values let's say you have a standard SOP that whenever I have samples that are to be processed to plasma, they will undergo centrifugation with this particular speed for 15 minutes. Then what should be the temperature, whether the brakes of the centrifugation machine are applied or not, who is doing the centrifugation. So all those details, you can preset those. Okay. So here, if you see, these values have come up from the workflow. I did not enter any values. If there are any changes that you need to make, you can make those and you can apply. Let's say I had to increase the gravitational force. Okay. So I can add the value, and this is the copy first to all icon. Once you click on it, it will copy the same value to all the rows. For usability, previously, if you notice, the remove button used to be there on the right side only. Okay, but we have enhanced that, and the button is also there on the start as well as the end. Whenever you scroll, the first column is frozen. Okay, which is and that also gives you a view of, okay, this is the sample, and if you're adding any fields at the end, you don't need to scroll to the left and then to the right again. The task list on the left side can also be collapsed. Okay, so if you want to have a big view of the all the fields in one screen, this can also be collapsed. Okay, so coming back over here, now that all my details for the centrifugation have been added, I'll click on submit. Okay, this will take me to the next task, that is creating derivatives. So I know that these whole blood samples are to be processed to only platelet-free plasma. I have fixed that field over here. Okay, I don't want the user to make any changes. So that's the standard procedure, that they will create platelet-free plasma, which is why this is fixed. Quantity, how much they are creating, they can add the value over here. Okay, this can either be same for all the samples or it can be different. Okay, and who is creating the sample? So the logged in user, current date and time are being defaulted. If you want to keep it blank, even that is possible. Okay, so you can do that in the workflow settings. Moving on to the next task, I'll now create aliquots out of these plasma samples. Okay, if you want to create, let's say for the first sample, I want to create aliquots of different type. Okay, a different quantity. Let's say I want to create 3 of 1 ml and 2 of 0.5 ml. So all I need to do is use the copy button at the last. It will copy the row and I can change the values. Okay, and the last step now is to store the samples. So whatever aliquots I have created, I want to store them. The plasma derivatives have been used up, the whole blood is used up, and all what I want to store is aliquots. So whatever aliquots are created are pushed to this step. Okay, so these are all the aliquots only. And if you see here, this is the auto allocation that is running. In the CP, if you remember, you can set up whether you want to use the recently used container or the least empty container. So whatever strategy you set up in the CP, that will be used and the container will be automatically populated. Okay. And similar to the specimen collection screen before, you can do the manual allocation. You can, or you want to rerun the allocation. If you remove any rows, even that can be done. Okay, and once done, you can click on submit, so that will complete your workflow. Okay, so that's the plasma processing workflow that we saw. Next is the sodium heparin workflow. In this workflow, same, we'll first receive the tubes, and then further there are some additional different steps that we need to perform. And in this, we will be creating PBMC samples. Okay, so let me go to the sodium heparin workflow. And for the demo purpose, I have, a list of specimen labels that we can use. From here, I'll now click on create. I'm not using the waiting queue for this workflow. I have a list of specimen labels in hand, or let's say tube in hand. I want to scan those. So you can use the scanners. You can bring your cursor here and start scanning. So it will add all the labels, and once you click on add, it will get all the specimens that are present over here. Okay, if you see above here, there are two more options that are available. Okay, one, use barcode. Let's say you want to scan the specimens using your barcode. So all you need to do is click on use barcode. The specimens will be recognized based on the barcode. Let's say you don't want to scan the individual labels, you have a kit in hand. Okay, and whatever samples are there in that kit, you want to pull all those in the workflow. So all you need to do is use visit names, scan the kit barcode, and it will fetch all the specimens that are suitable for the workflow over here. Okay. Now I'll click on start. Okay. So this will now start the workflow. Again, this is the receive step. If any changes are needed, you can do. There's a print button at the end. So once I receive the samples, I want to print out the specimen labels and have it, added on the tubes. So that's the print button over here. And I'll click on submit. Next step here is dilute the material. That is, this step is for pooling the samples. Now let's say I don't want to pool the samples and I just want to go ahead with the PBMC isolation. So I have a skip button available over here. Okay. When I click on skip, it will ask whether are you sure you want to skip? I'll say yes, I'm not pooling the samples. So I'll say uh, not pooling. I can give a reason why I am skipping the step. Let's say not pooling for less quantity. Okay. So the quantity is less, and which is why I don't want to pool. Okay. And your task will be skipped. Let me take you to the specimens and show what happens to the specimens when I have skipped the task. Okay. So the specimens were in a collected state. The first task was a receive specimen. It's loading. Just a minute. So what events I'll find over there is the collection event, received event. And now that I have skipped a task, a deviation event will be added. And that event will have the reason why it was skipped. Okay. So if you see here, you say which task was skipped. It was dilute the material. It gives you the workflow name. And in the comments, it will also give you why this task was skipped. So whatever reason you add over there, it will be captured over here. Okay. Okay. Then there's Ficol isolation. So these are different events that you can set up and add them to the workflow. You can limit the number of fields that you wish to capture and save. So let me submit and I'll show you the Ficol isolation event as well. Okay. So if you see the event, there are multiple fields in it, but for now, I don't wish to capture any of those. I just want to say that, okay, was the fecal isolation done? Which user did it and what date and time? So you can limit the number of fields that you want the user to enter in the workflow. Okay. Then again, it's centrifugation. This time we don't have the G-force or the RPM details over here. And I click on submit. There are different types of calculations that can be done in workflows. Okay, so let me show you over here. I'll type some values and I'll show you how that. Okay, so this is 2. Let's say I add 4.3 and dilution is, let's say, 4. Okay, I'm just typing in some random values, and the moment I add the dilution factor, it is calculating the values. Okay, so such calculations can also be done in the workflows based on how you do it in your lab. Okay, so your all the manual work is now gone. You just add the formulas and then it will do it on a for whatever samples you needed. Okay, and now I'll click on submit. Okay, so the aliquot. So if you see, for the first one and the last one, it has got 1 aliquot. For the second one, it's 2. It is also again depending on the calculation that is set up. I will not go into details of the calculation. This was just an example as to how you can do it in the workflows. Okay, and again the last step is store. So you are storing all the aliquots and the container location has come up. That's for auto allocation. Okay, so that was for the sodium heparin workflow, wherein we started with whole blood. We saw how you can skip the tasks, deviation events, and we saw how the calculations work, and at the end we store the sample. Okay, then moving on to the next workflow, that is the tissue processing workflow. And I have a few specimen labels that are copied, so let me quickly copy those and go back here. So that's the tissue workflow. And these are all the batches that the user had started and they could not complete. So if you want to see any of the previous batches that you started, you can use the search button over here, and say all, and you'll get a list of all the batches that were completed. If you want to search based on the specimen label or barcode in hand, you can type that over here and it will get you the specific batch under which the sample was processed. Okay, all I need to do is create batch, add my labels, add. So it has found all the specimens and I'll click on start. Okay, so the previous two workflows that we saw, those were related to fluid samples. You receive the fluid, you process them into either plasma or PBMCs. This time, let's see how to process the tissue samples. Okay, so here we have, uh, if you see here the fields that have come up, they are different as compared to the other workflow. So we have the bank ID, so that's the patient ID, barcode of the sample, so this is the labels that we scanned, the type, then there's SPID. So if I have details I can add. If you notice, these fields are not mandatory, so I can skip and I can move ahead. If you want to force the users to add these details and only then move to the next task, it is possible to make them as mandatory as well. Okay, so submit. Next task is to create blocks. So the fresh tissue samples that I have received, I now want to create blocks out of it. I can provide the quantity, the what is the number of tissue chunks that I'm using to make the blocks. And here, if you see, this field is not uh, I want to ask the users to change it. So I want to give them access. Okay. So what I can do is, if I am creating a different block or not a block, any other sample, let's say frozen tissue, the user can change it. Okay, so we have given them that flexibility to change the type. So here, this count, let's not add much details. I'll just move to the next step. Okay, and out of the same fresh tissue samples, I also want to create a few slides. Okay, so I can add the details for the slides. I can remove samples. Let's say for one sample, the quantity was not left. Okay, it was completely used up for creating the blocks. So what I can do is I can remove the sample from the step and say that parent quantity not sufficient to create a slide. Okay. And if needed, I can also dispose the sample saying that it is completely exhausted and I want to close it. Okay. So for now, I'll just remove that. Okay. And I'll now move forward. So whatever samples were created are now being stored. So if you see it, depending on the sample, so slides are being stored to a different container, whereas the blocks are going to a different container. Okay, so the auto allocation is working over here. And nanodrop event, this is a form. So in this, let's say you are getting details from a machine, okay, and that's in a file. So why ask the users to come and enter those details over here manually? We can ask them to use the same file. You can just change the headers and you can upload the file over here. Okay. You also have an option to download the file, the template. So that will be just a file with headers. Okay. And it is opening. Let me open it. So this is similar to our bulk import file that we download. So that's the template. Okay. So these are the fields that are visible. Okay. So these are all the fields that are there in the form, and whatever fields are there in the form, they're shown over here as well. So let me add data for a few samples and show you. I'll just copy one label. I'll just add a few values and I'll show you how that works. So I will choose the file, downloads. Okay, you can also say what date format, time format you're using, what is the field separator, and click on upload. Okay, so it gives you a proper error message saying that your batch has these many samples, but then the file does not have those. Okay, so whatever values I entered, so I just entered values for two fields, that is the ratios, and it has populated over here. Okay, and this is how you can use a file to import the data in the workflow batch itself. So you don't have to navigate outside the workflow, do the bulk import and come back. An option is provided to do it inside the workflow. Okay, and I'll just submit. Okay, so this completes the tissue processing workflow, wherein we saw how tissue samples are processed into blocks, slides, how you can remove samples, certain samples from the batch, and then how file upload works within the workflows. Okay. Next is the genetics workflow. And I'll just navigate to the workflow and I'll use the labels that I have. Okay, so in this we'll see a few different features. Okay, so now yeah, so these are the samples that I scanned. So these are quite a few fields, more fields actually. And now click on submit. Yeah. Okay, so in this, so these are all whole blood samples. Okay, I have samples. Now I want to decide what next should happen to them. Okay. So if I have both DNA samples and whole blood samples in this batch, both samples should not go to DNA extraction, right? So DNA samples will directly go for QC, whereas the whole blood samples need to go for DNA extraction. Okay. Just to give you an example, let's imagine, okay, this sample is, DNA, and I map it to the extraction QC directly. Okay. And I don't want to send it to DNA extraction because that's already a DNA. Now let me click on submit. So these are 6 samples. Now in the DNA extraction step, we will be seeing only 5 samples because the 6th sample, I did not want it to go to the DNA extraction step. Okay. So if you see the last one, WB8, that's missing from here. Okay. Here I say, what is the quantity of the DNA that I am creating? Okay. I'll add some random values. The date on which it was created. And I'll click on submit. So in this step, we'll find our 8th sample, okay, which we had skipped from this assigned the DNA extraction step. This is the specimen present over here. Okay. Okay, in here, so there's concentration values. Okay, I'll just quickly add some values and then we can move ahead. Okay, so these are all the default values that are coming up. If needed, the user can change it. If not, they can move ahead with the values that are there. Okay, and these are some status that are there. Okay, so here you are giving a status to the samples so that whenever the user see, they get an idea of the exact status of that sample. Okay, here I said that it was ready for analysis, and now who is doing the analysis on the samples, all those details can be added over here. I'll select users, analysis state, and now I'll say that the analysis is completed. Okay, so I've completed my analysis on the DNA samples. Details for the user who did the analysis is also added and submit. The last step in this workflow is the review. Okay, so analysis completed, next step review completed. So I can add all those details of who reviewed the samples. Okay, okay, and submit. Okay, so that was the genetics workflow. So this was for the DNA samples and analysis. So we'll pick the last workflow. I'll just take a minute. Um, when the samples are processed, what I can do is, if the samples are, let's say I want to send it back to the user who had, given it to me for processing. Let's say they had sent out some samples, they wanted DNA, and as soon as the DNA is created, I want to send it back. Okay, so why come out of the workflow, you go to the distribution protocol, then you add the samples and then distribute the samples. Instead, the distribution module is also now brought to the workflows, wherein you can add it as a step, and you can say that I want to distribute the samples. So let me take you to that workflow, DNA processing workflow. Okay, and I'll show you just the last batch of this. Okay, so these are the specimen labels. Let me quickly create DNA. Okay, and let's say so this is another feature that we have. If the labels are not being auto generated and you want to, let's say you have H tubes, so you have pre-barcoded tubes, and you want to assign those barcodes to the samples. Okay, so all you need to do is you scan, and even if it is comma separated or it is a new line, it will assign those sample specimen labels to the individual rows. So here, if you keep it comma separated, it has put over here. If I have it in 2 lines, even that is working. Okay, so that's the scan feature. I'll add some details. Okay, and submit. Okay, now these are all the fields that are there for the distribution. So I can select the distribution protocol. All the details, other details come up automatically, like the receiving institute, the requester. Okay, you also have the option of adding tracking URL, whether you want to dispose the samples, check out the samples, and once done, you can click on submit. So let me just quickly, yeah. So I'll just click on submit. So my batch is completed. Now let me go to the distribution protocol and show you the, no, not the distribution protocol. I'll go to the orders and show you the recent order. It's loading. Or I can go from here as well, whichever loads quickly. Yeah, it's here. So demo distribution protocol. Yeah. So this is the order that we just did. So if you see this, these are the two DNA samples that we have distributed, and they are distributed and closed. So even if you open the specimens in the new tab, it will say that the specimens have now been distributed. Okay, so it says distributed, distribution event added. So to which distribution protocol is what it was distributed, same details over here. Okay. So those are all the things that we wanted to cover in the demo. We'll now unmute you. Please feel free to ask questions if there are any. I'll just check the chat till then. So Lee's question, could you use a box scanner in the workflows? Lee, yes, I just said that you can use your scanners to scan, not the box scanner, but the handheld scanner to scan in your individual specimen labels. Is there a
But yeah,
maximum
there is
number?
also support for integration with box scanners now. And you can also scan directly in the workflow. So but the box scanners are vendor specific, right? So we support Azenta ZIAP model of boxes. But yeah, so you can scan the whole box, get 91 barcodes at a time, and process all the specimens in one go.
Jamie's question, is there a maximum number of samples that can be added per batch? So Jamie, there's no limit to the maximum number of samples as such. You can add specimens from multiple patients from the same patient. It completely depends on you how you are processing it in the workflow. So Jacob's question is, if a biobank is performing the sequencing of the DNA or RNA, would it be an option to include this processing also as a workflow in OpenSpecimen? Samples will then be used and samples will not be stored. Yes, all this can be done in OpenSpecimen. So you can create a customized workflow and add your steps in that. So there's one more question. Can you have a fixed order of different parent tubes per CP? Fixed order of different parent. I did not quite get your question. Can you unmute and speak?
I think it is the order is the order of the specimens that you scanned in the workflow. So right now the what we show in the list is how you scanned it, right? So
yeah.
Yes, it's in the order
yeah.
we scanned it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
and if it's then it's possible when you scan it in the right like for example for first the EDTA and then the serum tube, you always have to do the same and you cannot filter with that.
No, when you scan, it will retain the sequence, but let's say you want to change the sequence and keep it in a particular way every time. Like you want to sort it based on, let's say, the PPID or the label. That sorting is also possible.
Okay. Then
Okay.
I know what we have to do then. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So Anu's question is, what file types for copying a field from a file into OS are supported? So currently, Anu, we are just supporting CSVs.
no, it's the
So
same
that's
template. It's the bulk import template that is supported. So it's not a separate file or a file type. So anything that is supported in the bulk import is what is supported here right now.
Yes.
And also there is a question from Lee about that.
Is there a documentation on how to maintain and edit workflow rules? Yes, we have a workflow documentation for everything as to how to create workflows, how the waiting queue works. We have also short video demonstrations, so that will help you understand the code. So that's there on our wiki pages.
Okay, does not look like any more questions. Feel free to email us. We'll be sharing the recording of this session on YouTube and with all the registrations. But if you have any follow-up questions or want to see a demo workflow being created for your use cases, feel free to contact us and we can take it forward with the more one-on-one discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.